We've all heard the expression, truth is stranger than fiction, and nowhere is this more clear than in the criminal justice system. Murder, in particular, has a tendency of bringing forth the most bizarre, morbid, and horrifyingly inventive tactics. It's a gloomy, foreboding environment that we'll explore today. Buckle up because we're going to go over 5 frightening murder tactics that will leave you gasping for air. The Deadly Umbrella, a Cold War espionage tale. Georgy Markov's death is a horrifying example of how imaginative and disturbing murderers can be. Markov, who was born in Bulgaria in 1929, was a dissident writer and broadcaster who fought his country's brutal communist authorities. His destiny, however, on a fateful September day in 1978 in London, sent shockwaves around the world. Markov was murdered using a poison umbrella. Yes, you read that correctly, an umbrella. Markov noticed a strong pain in his leg while waiting for a bus on September 7, 1978. He turned around to see a man with an umbrella apologize for the unintentional jab. What Markov didn't realize was that the umbrella was hiding a tiny hollow needle that injected a lethal pellet laced with ricin, a highly toxic toxin. It was too late by the time he arrived at the hospital, and he died 3 days later. This assassination method was not only terrifyingly clever, but also sent a clear message to all dissidents. No one was safe from the totalitarian regime's vast reach. Georgy Markov's murder is a frightening and shocking example of how far some will go to silence their opponents. Dismemberment Down Under, the Katherine night horror. John Price was a man from New South Wales, Australia, who was murdered by his partner, Katherine Knight, in 2000. The severity of the murder is what makes this case so disturbing. Knight did not simply take Price's life. She went to extraordinary measures to ensure he suffered. She repeatedly stabbed him, skinned him, and even attempted to cook his body parts. It's the stuff nightmares are made of. What's more frightening is the apparent motivation for this horrible crime. Knight is reported to have been deeply obsessed with Price, and their turbulent relationship was marked by violence and cruelty. Her acts stunned not only the local community, but also the entire world. Katherine Knight was the first woman in Australia to be sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. This case serves as a sobering reminder of the low depths to which humans may sink and the horrible tactics some people employ to exact their vengeance. The brutal symphony of pipes and hammers. Yu Young-chul, sometimes known as the Raincoat Killer, is a terrifying figure in the annals of true crime. With his brutal killing spree in the early 2000s, this South Korean murderer shocked the nation. Yu's reputation stems not only from the fact that he murdered several lives, but also from the heinous techniques he employed. This troubled man preyed largely on wealthy and elderly victims, luring them with the prospect of financial gain. His proclivity for dismemberment was what made his actions extremely horrible. He frequently hacked his victims to bits, and he didn't stop with 1 or 2. His confirmed victims numbered more than 20. But it does not stop there. He used a variety of murder tactics, making his murders even more horrifying. He poisoned, bludgeoned, and strangled his victims, resulting in a nightmare pattern of death that perplexed authorities for years. His capture in 2004 effectively ended his reign of terror. His heinous techniques, however, continue to haunt those who followed his case. The Crimes of Dennis Nilsen. Dennis Nilsen, a legendary serial murderer in British history, was known for his terrifying and disturbing murder tactics, which sent shivers down many people's spines. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Nilsen, also known as the Muswell Hill Murderer and the Kindly Killer, worked in London. What distinguishes Nilsen is his frightening fondness for strangulation and drowning as murder methods. He would frequently entice young men to his home by promising them company, food, or booze. He would strangle or drown them, sometimes rendering them unconscious before carrying out his heinous actions. His murders went unreported for several years because he dismembered the bodies and flushed the remains down the toilet or burned them in his garden. Nilsen's ability to appear affable and regular added to the troubling nature of his story. He confessed to killing 15 young guys, but the true figure is thought to be higher. When the facts of his heinous killings were revealed, the public was taken aback, making Dennis Nilsen one of the most terrifying villains in true crime history. Diane Downs' Maternal Evil. Diane Downs made headlines in 1983 for an astonishing and horrifying reason. This mother murdered her own children. Yes, you read that correctly. She stated they were carjacking victims on a rural Oregon road. But her story immediately began to fall apart like a house of cards. Her behavior was suspicious, so the authorities began to investigate further. Sadly, one of her children died, while the other 2 survived, although with significant injuries. The reason for this heinous deed was even more disturbing. Downs was having an affair and felt that by getting rid of her children, she could saunter into a loving relationship without having to deal with the whole mom thing. Downs was convicted of murder in 1984 and sentenced to life in prison. Her case sparked a media frenzy, inspiring novels, TV films, and documentaries. People couldn't believe her cold-heartedness and lack of remorse.